Good afternoon and welcome to Travel Talk Live. I'm Candace Dressler, your moderator, and Cynthia Anderson will be watching the chat for your questions. As you know, our speaker today is Rob Stewart. He's going to present about design considerations for the aging gardener. Rob is an avid gardener, and I'm sure he's used many tools to moderate his gardening that he's going to share with us today. Over to you, Rob.
Well, thank you, Candace. What I'm going to share today is some of the ways that you can modify your gardening methods to compensate for your getting older. Unfortunately, that's something that we can't avoid. But as we age, we lose our flexibility, we lose some strength, we lose some endurance, and our joints begin to ache, and moving becomes more difficult. But I know that, we can't, as I mentioned before, you can't turn back the clock, but we can address these normal changes we will all experience. One of the first things to do outside of gardening is to keep active. You might not be able to run or even walk fast, but every time we move, our body lubricates our joints and helps strengthen our muscles, building more endurance over time, as long as we do this regularly. We also need to stretch regularly, our arms, our legs, our back. You'll notice if you haven't stretched in a long time, you might not be able to stretch very far. And in fact, if you do start to stretch, you'll be amazed at how, and do that regularly, you'll be amazed how quickly your flexibility returns. The basic trick is to not give up. Don't stop. Continually stretch, continually do some exercises to keep your body as young as you can. With respect to gardening, you should always make sure that you warm up before you exercise. If you don't know, warm muscles or cold muscles are more likely to tear and hurt than warm muscles. So by warming up your muscles, you help to eliminate any chance for injury gardening. So if you can walk for 5 minutes around your yard or on your patio, do some stretches, do some toe touches, do some reaches, reach up to the sky, reach around and back, do some squats to help strengthen your thighs. That's all important. With respect to your back, you might want to consider, and even if you don't have weights, you can just get a knapsack and put some books in a knapsack and use that and put that over your back and lean forward and back and to the side. And that will all help to strengthen your back. And the other thing to be aware of is when you garden, make sure you take breaks, frequent breaks. It's not a marathon. We're out there to enjoy ourselves. And the more relaxed we are, the more enjoyment we'll get from gardening. If you garden with regular garden beds, one of the things you might want to consider is installing raised beds in your gardens. You want to flatten uneven surfaces, and maybe install ramps if you have difficulty climbing stairs. Hiring an occupational therapist to help with your redesign is definitely worth the money. They will help you. They will help you choose the right height for your beds and the right width so that you can access them from either side, especially if you use a walker or, as an example in the on the slide, a wheelchair. In this case, the example here, you see the individual gets right up to the edge of the bed, and it's so much more enjoyable to garden this way than having to lean over with a sore back or bad knees or hips. But certainly the occupational therapist will help you by identifying the slope on your ramps, and maybe what material you should put on your flat surfaces, be it grass or whatever, so that you're not likely to fall while gardening. Also, the things you might want to consider, other types of aids. You could use a kneeler or sitters, or knee pads. In the photo above, you'll see the blue device is a device that you can, in the position that it's shown there, is a sitter, so you can sit on it and weed things maybe in a planter on your deck or in your garden, or you can turn it upside down and it'll be a kneeler, and it'll only be possibly 10 centimeters off the garden. So it's one of the things that it's got a nice soft surface, that blue material on the top, and when you turn it over, you get the same material on the bottom. Both are very comfortable, and it provides another alternative to actually kneeling right on the ground. The other item that a lot of us have are the step stool that you might already have in your kitchen. This particular one folds up and it's very light, and I've used it many times when I'm digging out the violets from my front lawn. You know, it's as opposed to sitting on my knees or kneeling on my knees, I should say. The sitting on this device really helps. Or you can, if your knees aren't that bad, but you're weeding or gardening on an uneven surface with some rocks and gravel and stuff, the knee pads also work very well in removing some of that sores that or items that could hurt your knees. The other thing you might want to consider is mulch. Now, I know it's not really an aid in that way, in that sense, but on the other hand, we know that by mulching, you reduce the amount of loss of water from your soil, which helps, means that you don't have to water as frequently. And it also makes it more difficult for weeds to grow. So if you have less weeds in your garden, you're more likely to be required to do that extra work. You can enjoy your garden without having to be deeply embedded in it all the time. And there are different materials that you can use. You can use wood chips, or you can use gravel or pea stone, and either of these works very, very well. You probably want to use it to a depth of maybe 5 to 8 centimeters, 2 to 3 inches in depth, just to make sure that it's doing the job that it should do. If you garden on a patio, you might want to consider using lighter pots instead of terracotta pots or ceramic pots, which can be quite heavy. Plastic pots or ones like that tend to be lighter. They also reduce the amount of transpiration of water from the pots, which keeps the soil moist longer, meaning that you have to water less. The other thing to consider is using soilless mix as opposed to a mineral-based mix like a garden soil, which would be a lot heavier and more difficult to deal with. One item that you can also do is, for example, with the taller pot in the photo, is you can fill half of the pot with the styrofoam peanuts. Now, these are peanuts which often are made of styrofoam. They're maybe 2 to 5 centimeters in length and width, and they're used if you've ever ordered plants in the mail. A lot of times the boxes that they come in will have these styrofoam peanuts in them to keep the pots from moving around. But most plants don't require much more than if a foot of soil to grow in. So with the example of the large pot here, you can easily reduce the weight of that pot so it's easier to move around, and it won't affect the growth of your plant. But the other thing you could use also are these movable saucers. These are saucers that have little wheels on the bottom that you can place underneath your pot, and you can use that to turn your pot instead of having to lift it up and turn it around. If you're trying to change the light that falls on the pot, or if you need to water at the back of the pot and you can't reach it with your watering can, it also does a good job. The other thing that you can do on a deck or patio is possibly have a small raised planter, or you can put your, failing to use a tall pot, you can put your smaller pots on a plant stand, and that too will help to reduce the amount of bending that you need to do in order to maintain the growth of your plants. If you indoor garden, you might want to make sure that you garden on the top of a tabletop. In this particular example, I had a large tray manufactured by a fabricator in town, and made of aluminum, and it covers basically the whole top of the table. So I don't need to run around with individual little saucers under each pot. So that cuts down on the just the material that you need. It also makes it easier to move pots around on the tabletop. The other thing you might want to consider are grow lights, especially if you have a table full of plants. And the LED type, which have now been out for probably 5, 6, 7 years, are excellent. They do produce a wide range of light, from the ultraviolet to the infrared, and through the whole spectrum of visible light. And one of the advantages of some of the units is that you can choose whether you're growing, your plants are in a vegetative growth state, such as little seedlings and things like that, or ferns, or vines that don't flower, or you can set it to a setting where you can choose to have a setting that will promote more flowers. Now, it's interesting, I don't think these units were made exclusively for gardeners of regular plants, but they certainly have been pushing it for those who want to grow marijuana. And so that's something else that you might want to know. But it's interesting because I have a number of these units, and every time I order them, I always laugh because they say that they will send you their units in a non-labeled box, so no one will know what you're getting in the mail. But I'm not worried about that. Only flowers is what I grow. But you know, instead of using a tabletop, you can also use raised planters. These also make a big difference. The other thing to be aware of with the LED type of lights is they do emit a fairly red light, even regardless of the setting, whether it's vegetative or flower setting. And that can be a bit distracting. So if you have a room where you can shut the door in the evening if you're watching TV or whatever, or something extra, another extra room type of thing, that might be the solution to avoid that red light. Or you can set it up on a timer to give you your 12 hours of light, 12 hours of darkness, and run the lights overnight. Now, that doesn't totally give you the percentage of darkness, because you're going to be not running them during the daytime, and there'll be some ambient light that probably comes in from your windows. But it may be a solution that you can play with a bit. The other thing about indoor gardening is you want to be close to a water source. Water is pretty heavy. A liter of water will weigh about 1 kilogram. And it doesn't take long if you're running up and down the stairs because the source of your water is not near, that you soon tire out. Although it may help with your endurance, but it isn't probably something that you shouldn't consider. And also possibly with a lightweight plastic watering can that you can use to water your plants. With respect to tools, you can use look at especially hand tools. If you can find the hand tools that have a slightly longer handle, there are some I've seen on the market that handle might be 18 inches long. So if you're weeding and kneeling on your kneeler or sitting on your step stool, you can get in and weed between the plants without having to use a large tool or having to overly stretch using a hand tool. So that's something that you should consider. The other thing is looking at purchasing a lopper. There's the bypass type, which is useful for most of material that you want to cut. Or there's the anvil type, which typically is used for cutting dead material, because the way the anvil works is you get a flat surface on either side of the blade, which if you're cutting live material will damage the material that's left after you cut off the piece you're removing, and that will help, or that will delay the recovery of the part that's left. So that's one of the things that you should be aware of. Loppers, a lot of them typically have a mechanism that will allow you to magnify your strength by using a lever system that will help to reduce the effort required to cut through the material. So that's another thing you might want to consider. Lighter tools, on the other hand, especially those made with composite handles, are, because they're lighter, are easier to use than tools, for example, shovels, rakes, and forks that are made of heavy wood handles. So that's something else that you could consider if you're having difficulty maneuvering some of your heavier garden tools. The other thing that you might want to consider is consider looking at a wheelbarrow with a plastic tray rather than a steel tray, or if you have the space in between your garden beds, maybe a wheelbarrow with two leaves it's more stable than one with a single wheel. But either way, I think both of those, it depends on your degree of strength and maneuverability as to which wheelbarrow you should consider. Other things to consider are using tools that are powered by electrical batteries instead of ones with a gasoline motor. The advantage of the electric battery is it doesn't issue any smell, doesn't emit any smell when it's running. The device tends to be quieter because doesn't have that internal combustion engine making a lot of noise. And then you also don't have to deal with gasoline or stinky oil cans. So you might want to consider, as you age, to look at more battery powered tools. And if you're looking for a lawnmower, one of the types that's quite often available are the self-propelled ones. So they even are even better than the push ones because they reduce the effort required to cut your lawn. And similarly, one of the things that, instead of raking, you can consider purchasing an electric powered blower or vacuum to get the leaves off your lawn, or to remove them from your garden if you choose. For example, in my case, normally we say leave the leaves on for the winter, but I have a crabapple tree that unfortunately is prone to rust. And I end up vacuuming off, try to vacuum as many of the leaves underneath that tree in the fall, so that I don't spread the fungus spore to the tree in the spring. That helps. It's not a definite cure and preventive, but it does work. The other thing that you might want to consider are edge trimmers, which are electric batteries. Or you can always put brick edging around your garden beds, so that you can run the wheels of your lawnmower on the brick edging. So you don't need to purchase that edge trimmer. You can trim the edges of your garden just with your lawnmower. In terms of watering, you might want to consider changing your system from using hoses and sprinklers to maybe getting an in-ground watering system if you still will maintain your lawns. Or in your vegetable garden, you can go with, and even in your lawns, you can go with some low pressure systems. This is an example here in the photo of a sprayer or a sprinkler that's attached to here's the little tube that connects it to the distribution hose that that you can use, and basically you can put those where you need them, so that and also control the rate of water that's dispersed, so that you know, a plant that requires a lot more water can have 1 or 2 sprinklers near it, where one that doesn't require much may have a different type that hardly admits any waters at all. The advantage of these systems is that once they're in place and you can cover all areas of your garden, is that you will be able to reach the plants everywhere, and you can set it up with timers in such a way that it'll come on at certain times, or even if you don't have it so that it comes on at certain times. One of the values of a timer is that it'll always shut off when it's finished. So you tend not to leave the hose on and leave the house and forget about it and then overwatering your garden. The other thing that you can also get are low pressure systems that have multiple zones in them, so that you could have a zone for the gardens in the backyard and ones in the front, and use them when they're in the shade or later at night type of thing, and selectively choose which zone you choose to water. The other thing you can do is that you can look at, if you're a small patio or you have a very small garden, you could consider those flexible expanding hoses. Now, I don't have any experience with them. They look really intriguing and useful, especially because they don't take up much space and they're very light, so that you're not dragging around 75 pounds or 50 pounds of hose to water a bed, water some flowers on your patio. But it is something that that might work in those situations where you don't have a lot of area to cover. The other thing is watering cans. Make sure you get a light plastic watering can instead of maybe a heavy metal can. That also will cut down on the weight of water that you're transmitting around your garden, or on your deck, or even, as we mentioned earlier, in-house. The other thing that you can do to reduce your work effort is take advantage of relatives. If you have some young relatives, your son or daughter or grandson or daughters, maybe they can help out with some of the chores around the yard. One of the interesting facts is that in Ontario, each high school student is required to volunteer 40 hours of time before they're allowed to graduate from high school. And if you can contact the local high school, I'm sure you'd be able to find some willing student to come out and help you with your planting or with your weeding, mow of your lawn, whatever. This time of the year in the fall, kids are getting back to school. Now that 40 hours of volunteer time is over their whole high school career. But the advantage of using a local high school student is there's new ones coming into the system every year. So there's lots of opportunity there to get someone to help you with your gardening. And certainly it would be a way to help you and to help the student. And that's it for today. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Rob. I have a couple of questions. What is your recommendation of any adaptive tools?
Well, some of the tools that I mentioned were the ergonomically designed hand tools, like a trowel or whatever, that allow you to reduce the amount of wrist action that you need to use the tool in normal gardening activities. The other thing that you can do is that I have purchased a a strap that goes around your wrist and provides additional support for using tools. And I have seen on the internet, I haven't noticed them in the stores, but I have seen tools where they actually is a extension of the tool with a ring or type of ring that goes around your forearm that would support the tool when you were using it. You almost use the tool with your wrist, and you're being straight, and rather than grasping the tool with your hand down, you actually would grab it in a way that you would think that you might stir a oh my goodness, some soil or something like that. Anyway, there are numbers of tools out there, and I think this is also one place where the occupational therapist could, hopefully the one that you if you use one, can help you with these types of things and the type of designs of hand tools and that type of thing that will make the job much more easy.
I find lightweight pots blow over a lot. Any ideas to prevent them from blowing over?
Well, I guess it's I mean, on one hand, you're trying to reduce the weight to so that you can move them around. They're not hard to move, but on the other hand, you want to try to compensate it for the wind. So I think you need to find a fine balance between maybe not removing as much of, or putting more soil into the pot so that it's heavier, and as opposed to removing some of the soil and using the peanut styrofoam. Or you can always, if you, for example, are using those saucers with the wheels on them, you could put some heavier weights at the bottom of the pot so that it won't blow over, but you still have the advantage of using the saucer to help move your plant around during the summer season.
I have a comment from someone watching, and they said, a very interesting presentation. You mentioned using styrofoam peanuts to fill in the deep pots. A great idea, though. I have a word of warning. There are now environmentally friendly, water-soluble corn packing chips that are used like styrofoam peanuts, but are more in a form of Cheetos. These latter would disintegrate quickly in a pot once water touches them. So make sure which kind of packing chips you plan to use. So that's just a comment for one of the participants.
Yes, no, that's a good point. Yeah.
And I have another question. What are the advantages and disadvantages of using wood chips versus other materials for your garden to make your effort?
Right. Yes.
Reduce effort.
Well, one of the advantages of wood chips is that they're relatively light. They don't weigh a lot, so it's easier to if you put the bag or whatever into your wheelbarrow, it's a shovelful is not terribly heavy. So it's easy to distribute within your garden and without causing undue strain. The disadvantage is that they do deteriorate and compost into your soil, which is a good thing, but on the other hand, you do need to replace them frequently. On the other hand, if you used a product like gravel's heavy to put in, but it doesn't deteriorate. So if you put it into your soil, it'll stay there for a long time.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's time to wrap up.
Okay. Well,
thank you very much for the great talk. I learned lots of stuff. If you have more questions, you can always send them to our Master Gardeners Helpline or on the Facebook page. And next week, join us for our topic, which is going to be vertical gardening with Leanne Smith. Thank you very much for joining us today on Trail Talk, and we'll see you next week.